So, like clockwork, one of the biggest stories in the NHL right now involves the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Boston Bruins first round series. We already talked about this yesterday and everybody pretty much saw the game. The Boston Bruins absolutely smoked the Toronto Maple Leafs, and even though the Money Pucks deserved to win-o-meter had the Leafs at an 80% chance of winning this game, the score was 5-1. The play on the ice really didn't feel like it. I mean, the Boston Bruins just had their way. Sure, the Leafs had their opportunities. They had their high-danger expected goals, chances in tight, rebound opportunities, but for the most part, the Boston Bruins wiped the floor with the Toronto Maple Leafs cheekbones. And when it comes to the guy in net for Boston, this is a conversation about Jeremy Swayman, because I did see a lot of people going out there and bringing up this very particular point about Swayman and his career that I wanted to talk about as well. Because it's no secret that Jeremy Swayman has been one of the better goaltenders in the NHL the past few years. The guy is 25 years old, 6'3", 194, left-handed catcher, and he is signed on till the end of this season, making $3.4 million a year. He's going to get an extension, and he's going to get paid, because this previous season he had a .916 save percentage, following up his .920 from last year. He's been so solid, and even in the game yesterday, he had a .972 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And of course, the only goal that was scored when it was already 4-0, so it's not really like it was too damaging of a goal in the first place. But Jeremy Swayman being good contrasts very heavily to the Toronto Maple Leafs goaltending situation, which, let's just simplify it. Ilya Samsonov was bad yesterday. And when it comes to the way these goaltenders have played, Joseph Woll has been a little bit shaky ever since returning from injury. Like before he was injured and he was starting out the season playing, he was very good. But, of course, this is a rookie year for Woll, technically, which makes it totally acceptable for him to be up and down. He's not supposed to be a number one guy just yet. He is in his first full NHL season. So, Woll not being the best? Okay, fine. Samsonov, though, he was brought in to be that guy. He let in a few goals yesterday that probably should have been saves. I mean, far side rippers on the right side when they just walk right in and shoot. You don't like to see the goaltender give up goals like that. And whether or not you have doubts in Samsonov or not, the bottom line is Jeremy Swayman is just better. Which is why this video is being made. Because the question is, hey, what if the Toronto Maple Leafs just had competent, consistent, superstar-level goaltending? And did they have themselves the opportunity to get that earlier on? Well, the answer is yes. Because if you go over to Jeremy Swayman and you review his position in the 2017 NHL Draft, Swayman was drafted 111th overall by the Boston Bruins. One pick before, the Toronto Maple Leafs selected Ian Scott in the 110th overall position. Now, Ian Scott, to his credit, is not a bad guy. He had a pretty good development path in the Toronto Marlies. He was forced to retire early, as unfortunate as that may be. Sometimes guys go through freak injuries which prohibit them from being able to do their jobs. But Ian Scott was drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs out of the Prince Albert Raiders in the WHL, where he had an .895 save percentage in 50 games played. As we had said, he eventually worked his way onto the Marlies. He had played 2 games with that team, split between 3 years. He also eventually improved his Prince Albert Raiders numbers, getting a .932 save percentage in his final season. But eventually he played in the ECHL, and that was about it. He had 5 games played with the Thunder, and 1 game played with the Growlers, before unfortunately being forced to retire. So Ian Scott, while he definitely was a notable name for some people at some point in Toronto prospect conversations, he never really broke past the ECHL-AHL boundary. Which is not his fault, of course, but it is unfortunate and very unlucky to see it go down. And it's even more painful when you acknowledge that Jeremy Swayman literally went 1 pick after the Leafs went after their own goaltender. Swayman, if you're interested, was drafted out of the Sioux Falls Stampede in the USHL, so where the Toronto Maple Leafs took their goaltending scouting in the dub, the Boston Bruins were thinking about USHL guys, so America, Canada, you can see the difference there. Jeremy Swayman eventually played for the University of Maine Black Bears, where he was an immediate success story, posting up a .921 save percentage as a freshman. He then played 2 more seasons, maxing out at a .939 save percentage in 34 games played with that same Black Bears team. Interestingly enough, his record was 18-5-11 that season, which is really odd considering, hey, they won more games than they lost, which is good, but he lost 11 out of 16 games in overtime. That's very odd. Eventually, Swayman did start out with the Boston Bruins. He'd split the load between that and Providence. He played a game for the Bruins in 2021's postseason. He wasn't great, but eventually things started to really go his way. .914 save percentage at 41 games played in 21-22, .920 save percentage at 37 games last year, and again the .916 this year. He's been very, very good. So for the Toronto Maple Leafs, this is yet another example of how sometimes luck plays a part of it, you know? You can have the best scouting staff in the world, you could have the most accurate prediction of what's going to happen with prospects, but if a guy gets injured, then that's it. And I'm not going to make it seem like, oh, Ian Scott was going to be this amazing player had he not gotten injured and not have been forced to retire. Of course, the opportunity might have been there. Like, if Ian Scott eventually played an NHL game, then that would have been a great achievement for a guy taken in the 4th round. But for Jeremy Swayman being taken 1 pick after, kind of rubs a little bit more salt in the wound. 4th-round guys rarely make the NHL just in general, so seeing Jeremy Swayman do that and be an absolute star in the process is kind of wild. Now, I want to give some shout-outs as well. This is where I initially saw this idea. Frisk Bob went out there and posted this earlier this morning on Twitter. I want to effing die. And it's the picture of Ian Scott and Jeremy Swayman being taken one after the other. And a lot of questions are being brought up in the comments, like, oh, no way, what could have happened if the Leafs just had Swayman? There's a lot of defending for Ian Scott in here, which I totally think is justified and fair. Another reply says, Swayman even said in an interview a little while ago that he was expecting to be drafted by the Leafs, and included is a video of him on the Drop in the Gloves podcast, so yeah, the Toronto Maple Leafs literally almost got Swayman, but they missed out on him by 1 pick and are now getting smoked by him in the postseason. Could you imagine the Toronto Maple Leafs, this core, this assembly of guys, how good everybody is up front, how solid sometimes their defense can be? I say sometimes very loosely, but what if they just had superstar caliber goaltending? What if? I mean, when was the last time they had that? Freddie Anderson? That was a while ago. But if Jeremy Swayman was as good as he is now, playing for Toronto instead of Boston, then who knows what the ceiling could be for this Toronto Maple Leafs team. I think the goaltending has played a big part into how people perceive the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, sure, there's always going to be that reputation of, oh, top guys that don't show up and they don't score and they throw the puck over the glass in the most inopportune times. Like, Mitch Marner has that reputation. Austin Matthews cannot stop hitting the post. John Tavares, do these guys really show up? Yada, yada, yada. There's all these conversations about the Maple Leafs, but goaltending, I think, was also one of those as well. Heading into this postseason, especially. Ilya Samsonov, man, he just hasn't been it. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Toronto Maple Leafs and what they could have been had they drafted Jeremy Swayman. Swayman himself thought that he would have been drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs, but it turns out Kyle and his guys ended up missing this by 1 pick. How would things have changed if everything went differently? And what are your thoughts on Ian Scott? Because this guy was pretty good as a prospect. I mean, the projection was to maybe be a tandem with Wall at some point, but of course we didn't end up seeing that. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the Toronto Maple Leafs and Jeremy Swayman. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.